No labels won't help Trump. Our polling shows that a unity ticket would pull from both parties equally. As No Labels works to gain ballot access for a potential 2024 independent presidential ticket, most of the vitriol directed at us comes from the Democratic establishment, which is anxious that we'll hurt President Biden and help elect Donald Trump. But if these concerns were well-founded, I wouldn't be a part of this effort. No Labels has spent almost 2 years conducting extensive polling and modeling to understand our potential effect on the race and what our path to victory could be, including a poll late last year of more than 25,000 registered voters nationwide. It found that a moderate independent ticket would pull equally from both parties, 14% from registered Republicans, 14% from registered Democrats. This finding is backed by precedent. Ross Perot pulled equally from both parties in 1992. Of course, since No Labels would be nominating a unity ticket that could include a Republican and Democrat as running mates, much depends not only on who the candidates are, but the order in which they appear on the ticket. In July and August we tested how the partisan breakdown of the ticket would affect the race by surveying 10,000 registered voters in the top 8 presidential battleground states: Arizona, Florida, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. The poll, conducted by Harris-X, found that a unity ticket led by a Republican presidential candidate had a stronger path to victory and drew more votes from Mr. Trump than Mr. Biden in 7 states, with North Carolina the sole exception. Who will be on our ticket is still an open question, and we are currently determining the process by which that will be decided. But one thing is certain. We stand by our original pledge that we will nominate a ticket only if the American people want it and if the polling is clear that we won't be a spoiler. For now, both conditions are being met. Our polling shows that an independent ticket has a legitimate and expanding path to victory. In December, 58% of registered voters said they'd be open to voting for a moderate independent ticket if Messrs. Trump and Biden were the alternatives. By the summer that figure had grown to 63%, and some of the most significant growth occurred among a segment of voters who could be described as liking Mr. Trump's policies but not Mr. Trump. For any who are skeptical of No Labels' internal polling, let's remember that poll after poll shows that 2/3 of Americans don't want a rematch of the 2020 election. A Gallup poll from October found that 63% of voters are open to a third party and that demand for an alternative is higher among Republicans than Democrats, suggesting that Mr. Trump could have more to lose from the entry of a viable third choice. Of course, no one can know exactly what effect a third ticket would have, especially if you add a fourth or fifth ticket. While our data don't indicate that No Labels would hurt Mr. Biden, it's entirely plausible that Cornel West would, since he is running as a third party from the president's left. Similarly, reports indicate that the Trump team is preparing attacks against Robert F. Kennedy Jr. after its polling found that his independent run could take votes from Mr. Trump. No Labels' opponents in the political establishment wrap themselves in high-flying rhetoric about protecting democracy when they are merely protecting their turf. This has been the two-party playbook for decades, and the resulting false binary choice hasn't served our country well. It's why a Pew Research Center poll last month found that support for both parties is at record lows, disgust and exhaustion with politics is at record highs, and voters are increasingly losing hope that it will get better. In this environment, doing nothing is the greatest risk of all. No Labels is trying to do something to heal our broken politics. If we offer our ballot line to a presidential ticket in 2024, our purpose won't be to spoil the election but to enable a unity ticket to win. That would be unprecedented, but what about today's politics isn't? No Labels won't help Trump. Our polling shows that a unity ticket would pull from both parties equally. As No Labels works to gain ballot access for a potential 2024 independent presidential ticket, most of the vitriol directed at us comes from the Democratic establishment, which is anxious that we'll hurt President Biden and help elect Donald Trump. But if these concerns were well-founded, I wouldn't be a part of this effort. No Labels has spent Israel's worst day at war. When I need the most accurate analysis about Israel, the first call I always make is to my longtime friend and reporting partner there, Nahum Barnea, a veteran Yediot newspaper columnist. When I called him on Saturday afternoon for his read on the Hamas attack on Israel, I was stunned by his first response: "This is the worst day that I can remember in military terms in the history of Israel, including the blunder of the Yom Kippur War, which was terrible." Nahum is a careful reporter who has covered every major event in Israel for the past half-century, and when he explained his rationale, I realized it was an understatement. This is not your usual Hamas-Israel dust-up. The Gaza-Israel border is only 37 miles long, but the shock waves this war will unleash will not only thrust Israel and the Palestinians of Gaza into turmoil, but will also slam into Ukraine and Saudi Arabia and most likely Iran. Why? Any prolonged Israel-Hamas war could divert more U.S. military equipment needed by Kyiv to Tel Aviv, and it will make the proposed Saudi-Israeli normalization deal impossible, for now. And if it turns out that Iran encouraged the Hamas attack to scuttle that Israeli-Saudi deal, it could raise tensions between Israel and Iran and Tehran's Lebanese proxy, Hezbollah, and also between Saudi Arabia and Iran. This is an incredibly dangerous moment on multiple fronts. But going back to Nahum's point, why is this war such a disaster for Israel, worse than the Yom Kippur surprise attack from Egypt and Syria, which happened 50 years and 1 day ago? For starters, said Nahum, there is the sheer humiliation of it for the Israeli military. In 1973 we were attacked by the biggest Arab army, Egypt. This time Israel was invaded in 22 locations outside the Gaza Strip, including communities as far as 15 miles inside Israel, by a military force belonging to the equivalent of Luxembourg. And yet this tiny force not only invaded Israel, overwhelming Israeli border troops, it took Israeli hostages back to Gaza across that same border, a border where Israel had spent roughly $1 billion erecting a barrier that was supposed to be virtually impenetrable. That is a shocking blow to Israel's deterrent capabilities. Second, he noted, Israel has always prided itself on the ability of its intelligence services to penetrate Hamas and Palestinian militants in the West Bank and get early warnings. For the past few weeks, as anyone following the news from Israel knows, Hamas was conducting what appeared to be practice maneuvers for just this kind of attack all along the Gaza border, right before the eyes of the Israeli military. But it appears that Israeli intelligence interpreted the moves as Hamas just trying to mess with the heads of the Israeli military and make commanders a little nervous, not as a prelude for an attack. Israeli intelligence apparently believed that Hamas desperately needed more financial assistance from Qatar, which has given Hamas over $1 billion in aid since 2012, and work permits for Gazans to work in Israel, and both Israel and Qatar have always required a quiet border in return. The intelligence interpretation is that they were training for something that they would never dare to do, Nahum said. It was bad judgment and arrogance. Hamas instead launched an incredibly complex and sophisticated invasion from land and sea. But now we get to the really terrible part for Israel. Hamas was not only